using the large iPad Pro because I've got so much information on this. I take all reviews extremely serious, especially lens and camera reviews, because I never want someone to buy a lens or a camera on misinformation, and I'm going to, of course, and I've said this many times, actually purchase this camera when it becomes available. I appreciate Fujifilm letting me borrow this camera for a week to test it thoroughly, and you can see my sunburnt face. I've actually been testing it very hard every day that I've had it. Been out almost 5 hours a day, posted some new images from the GFX100. Also, too, unlike other YouTubers that have reviewed some of the GFX cameras, I actually own both current GFX cameras, the 50S and the 50R, and I take this review extremely seriously, as I do all my reviews, but especially so on this one. And I'm actually grateful that I'm the first YouTuber to review the GFX 100S, and that I've actually tested it from top to bottom. I've actually been going over this camera over and over again, day and night, staying up really till 4:30 or even later in the morning with this camera, and shooting it a lot, and post-prodding the images in Capture One, the RAW files. And Capture One was updated many weeks ago for support of the GFX 100. First, let me start off by saying that I grew up with medium format. Medium format is what I used in photography school, both the 6.7 Pentax and owned Hasselblads, and even owned a Mamiya for a short period of time, even shot large format. So I'm actually very much and always have been in love with medium format and the medium format look. And the medium format look is real. Of course, you're actually seeing the same field of view, but a lot closer. For example, on the GFX system, we're talking about a 110mm lens having the same field of view as an 85, basically, but you're actually that much closer since you're using a 110. And of course, ignoring the high megapixel count on this camera, which cannot be ignored. I mean, the amount of information there is incredible. And the average JPEGs out of this camera are about 54 megabytes, and the 16-bit lossless RAW files out of the GFX 100 are average about 140 megabytes. That's 16-bit lossless RAW files. Actually, a lot of people have made the bold statement, and it's actually untrue, and as an owner of both current GFX cameras, that, well, the files are so huge, I bet they're harder to work with. And my main computer for editing is not this one, which I have here on the desktop. It's running 32 gig of RAM, and it has a 512 solid-state drive, and it's a 27-inch iMac, not the latest and greatest, and it's not an iMac Pro, but due to how nice, and this is no fanboy talk, this is reality, because when I make bold statements about a new camera, I mean, people will always hold my feet to the fire over it. They're actually easier to edit than a lot of files because there's so much elbow room. Obviously, there's an enormous amount of detail that you can just keep zooming in and zooming in. And over the past few days, I've been posting some 600 megabyte full TIFF files, which, yeah, those are huge, obviously so. And JPEGs also, straight out of camera JPEGs, which themselves, I mean, I'm not a JPEG shooter, but when you're talking about JPEGs from this camera, this beast, I mean, they're just incredibly impressive. The feedback has absolutely been 100%, and I've gotten an enormous amount of comments where people have said, oh my God, I've just never seen stuff like this. It's incredible. Just very, very emphatic declarations, and I'm in full agreement, and it is. This camera, however, is, and I'm going to make a very bold statement about this camera. I've been saying it for days, and I'm not the first person to say it, but I'll be the first person who's doing a complete review of the GFX 100. And even though this is a pre-production camera, this is the final hardware of this camera. So obviously there are going to be improvements on the firmware from this camera that I've been testing, but I mean, let's just say it's, I'm guessing, somewhere around 90–95% of the way there on firmware, and the hardware, of course, is final. I know that for a fact. Let me take the viewfinder off here a second. And I've actually got my tilt adapter on here, which anybody that gets a GFX 50S or the 100, I strongly, strongly recommend you purchase this. It's an absolute necessity. That even though this is a pre-production unit, it is final hardware, and it's very, very close to final firmware. And I'm only speculating on that fact. I can't say that definitively because Fujifilm is always updating the firmware. I mean, I've never been so in much anticipation of purchasing a camera as I am this one, and I do mean that literally, and I take this review very seriously, and that's why I whipped out my iPad Pro here, because I've got a lot of information on it. And I made sure I went over this information several times, because I take this review, very, very seriously. Not only is the first GFX100 review on YouTube, but I literally have been top to bottom on this camera many, many times, and I've had so much fun shooting it these past few days, and I still have it for a couple more days. I'm going to continue to shoot it and post images. That it is not the case, because there's so much elbow room in the raw files of this camera. It's actually easier to edit, because I just had an enormous avalanche of people saying, well, these files are so huge, it must be difficult, and your computer must choke, and that's not the case at all. I'm not running either that super duper of a computer, and they're easier to edit. I mean that emphatically. They're easier to edit because there's so much information there. The saturation is incredible. It's no fanboy talk, no exaggeration. It's like, what am I going to do to this? I'm going to straighten it up a little bit and crop it. Okay, there's that image has been processed. It actually takes less time to edit these than images from my D850 or my XT3 or even my other two GFX cameras. I mean, that's a fact. I've edited a lot of images from this, so it's completely contrary to what a lot of people are saying or assuming about this camera. Very, very important, and I was so shocked. I had the firmware files for the lenses to update, because all the lenses need firmware for communication for phase detect autofocus with the GFX100. And I had the files, but I didn't know which file went to which lens. So I went 2 days without it, and of course the camera was about 30% faster. It's like, well, that's fine. I know I need to update the firmware. So when I finally did update the firmware, the people that have actually had a few hours or a day or so with this camera, nobody said this really at all. I didn't hear anybody say it. I've been watching everything about this camera. This camera is fast. When I installed that firmware, the new firmware for a few lenses, I didn't update all my lenses. I've only been using really, well, I've tested all the lenses, but I've only updated the firmware on a few of my lenses. Fast. I make this declarative statement, and people will hold my feet to the fire on this if I'm incorrect, and I'm not incorrect. And I have all the GFX lenses. This is right in the middle of the road as far as speed. So far as like the fastest is the 250, and then the 110. The 32 to 64 is right in the middle there, the slowest being the 63 and the 45. So this is a perfect way to judge it with the 32 to 64. This camera with the updated firmware on this lens is as fast as the very last days of the XT2 with the 18 to 55. And for medium format, that's absolutely unbelievable. You may have little or no experience with medium format, but that is blasting fast and unbelievable for medium format. That opens this camera up for a lot of stuff, and I'd like to talk about that here in a few minutes. By the way, I shot for 5 hours today. The camera does take 2 batteries, but you only have to use one. It takes the same batteries as the 2 current GFX cameras. But it only pulls from the left battery first and then from the right. So after 5 hours of shooting today, it used 60% up of one battery only. So the battery life on this is extremely good. I actually thought it would, might drain the batteries, I don't know how much more due to the IBIS mech on this camera, but that's not the case. The battery life on this camera is extremely good. But yes, so absolutely shocked once I installed the lens firmware. And so this lens could talk with the camera for phase detect autofocus. The autofocus is very, very snappy on this camera. I mean, far and away on the top of Mount Everest relative to every other medium format camera. I mean, that's a bold statement, and I mean it serious as a heart attack. Because if I tell you something that bold and I'm wrong on it, people will crucify me for that, but I mean that. When I say that, I really do mean that. Dual SD cards, so you use 2 SD cards. Also, too, the touch to autofocus system, and it's the same as the XT3. I have this lower left quadrant set, so you can choose whichever quadrant you want. But since I'm left eye dominant, I chose the lower left quadrant. Very, very smooth and flawless, like it is on the XT3. So a lot of you have never shot medium format and you don't know this, And I'm really, really good at hand-holding cameras, far better than most people. That's not being egotistical, I'm just stating that as a fact. But shutter shake and shutter shock is because the mechanisms themselves are significantly more massive. Is a serious issue on all medium format cameras. In other words, any other medium format camera, all of them other than this one, you're shooting at 1/125th of a second, you're right at the borderline there, even if you're doing a great job for incurring shutter shock. And this is the world's first IBIS medium format camera, of course, and Fujifilm's statement that it has 5.5 stops on the IBIS mech is absolutely no lie. I've done with nearly 100% success rate, meaning brutally sharp, doing handheld and one handheld shot, just one hand, handheld obviously, low light, ambient photography, 1/10 of a second, a half of a second. That is absolutely amazing for full frame or even crop sensor, and completely unbelievable for medium format. You can't do that, not without a tripod. You could do that handheld with this camera. Very, very bold statement, and I posted image examples of that. It's absolutely true. That is another thing that really opens this camera up for a lot of photography that medium format has never been able to do before. I want to talk about that in a second also. So if you never shot medium format before, just realize that and people say, well, I can shoot handheld at 1/10 of a second with my full frame or crop sensor camera. And that's true, but you can't do that with medium format, but you can with this one. So that's absolutely incredible for medium format. It's completely unheard of. I'm not a video person, and I've never pretended to be, but I've posted a few video clips onto Facebook and other places, and looking at the video from this camera in 4K, factory defaults, and I actually tried a couple different things on this in the video settings. On my 27-inch 5K iMac, the video output, I'm not a video person, but even not being a video person, I could tell you that the output for video is, I was actually shocked. I thought, well, it's going to look really good. It's like, I had no idea it would look that good. That was standard default settings, no simulations or anything like that, 4K. Unbelievable. The video looked really, really good, and I do mean that emphatically. Really, this camera is absolutely no bigger than a Nikon D850. I showed you a prior video where the D850 height with grip is right about the same. This camera is not big at all. It's much thinner than even the GFX100 because of the big bump on the back. This camera, everybody kept calling it a beast. I assume they're calling it a beast because it's 102 megapixel, but this camera is no different than any full-frame Nikon DSLR with a vertical grip. Really, it reminds me, since it's a unibody where the vertical grip is integrated, it reminds me, if you had your eyes closed, of a Nikon D4. Ergo-wise, and also the rear sub-display, which the pro-level Nikon DSLRs have. Output is incredibly punchy and saturated in a good way. It actually reminds me 100% of the output from the Nikon D850. What this camera does is a lot of things that no other medium format camera does, and this is no fanboy talk or hyperbolic talk. It opens up indoor flash photography, indoor wedding ceremonies, where you would never ever even dream of doing that with medium format. First you'd have to stick it on a tripod. Totally impractical. This opens that up completely. This is a revolutionary, bold statement, but completely 100% emphatically, objectively, empirically true. It is a revolutionary, game-changing camera for the medium format sector. Flat out, bar none, no argument. Opens up for wedding ceremonies and event photography, no flash weddings, street photography, no flash club photography, documentary photojournalism, places where medium format just did not go, or did not go comfortably, without great suffering. You would just never use medium format for no flash. You just don't do it unless you had the space to stick it on a tripod. You use this like any other full frame camera for no flash wedding ceremony. 1/10 of a second handheld, still brutally sharp on medium format. That's absolutely unbelievable. The IMX 461 sensor, like I said, is very saturated and punchy. It reminds me exactly of the Nikon D850 output. As I've already stated, contrary to what a lot of people think, well, the files are huge, 140 megabyte average, 16-bit lossless RAW. It takes forever to process. No, it cuts a lot of time off post-production on these raw images, because the straight out of camera images, other than straightening them up a little bit if they need that and cropping them, my God, the images, like I said, just so much elbow room for not needing to do much, assuming you nailed the focus correctly in your composition. Of course, no camera is going to help your composition, of course, but no, they're easier and does take less time to post-process the images from this camera. Trust me on that one. I know what I'm talking about. I actually have processed a lot of raw files from this camera. Like I said, 140 megabytes average on the lossless RAW, 54 megabytes average on the superfine JPEGs. On 32 gig cards, when you format them and there's nothing on the cards, since I shoot everything RAW plus superfine, which is what you should be shooting, at least that's my recommendation, it says I have 189 shots. So starting from blank cards on 32 gig, you got 189 shots before the cards are full. Don't have to use the dials. Like I said, you actually have 3 menus on this button on the top. You actually have digital dials and histogram and a main screen. You do not have to use that at all. I call it nonsense. I've actually been really hot lately, and I've been outside for hours and hours, and sweating. And I'm actually calling nonsense on the notion of a slippery grip. Now the front is kind of geometrical, but there's rubber here on the bottom, which is where most of your hand is going. I'm actually calling nonsense on the vertical grip being uncomfortable. I've heard 3 people talk about that. Oh, Fujifilm needs to add rubbers. It's not fanboy talk. I would tell you that, and there's one thing I would actually like to add on this, with only one minor thing I'd want to change, and that could be changed in firmware. I actually have no complaints being hot and sweaty outside, and I did a lot of vertical shooting, a lot of portrait orientation shooting. Not a complaint at all. So I really call nonsense on that one. Forgetting about the 102 megapixels on this camera, which is what everybody's kind of got their eyeballs focused on. This camera is a revolutionary, game-changing camera. Strong, strong words, totally deserved on this. Medium format, and it's undeniably, absolutely the topmost medium format camera by miles. Nothing else comes close to this. It does not. Not with these capabilities, it does not. World's first fast autofocusing medium format camera. Like I said, what I judge the speed is the XT2's last firmware. With the 18 to 55, for example. Actually, with the 32 to 64, this is as fast in continuous autofocus as my Nikon D500. Bold statement, totally mean it, dead serious on that. When you get one in your hands, you can validate that for yourself. I don't make a bold statement like that unless it is objectively true, and I really do mean that. So it's the world's first fast medium format, world's first IBIS mech medium format, which makes handheld, low light, no flash ambient photography, opens up enormous amount of doors for all sorts of photography that medium format has never ever done before. It's not my opinion, that's flat out undeniable. World's first low light ambient slow shutter speed camera for handheld photography. World's first crossover medium format camera capable of fast autofocus for moderate sports, all street photography, no flash wedding photography, no flash event photography, no flash club photography, handheld, documentary, photojournalism, lots of other different avenues that medium format was not there for before. 85% of what most people gravitated or used FX cameras for until now is now covered with what I call UIO, Ultimate Image Output, the new GFX100, where people were going to a full frame for what I'd already said this one is capable of doing. Low light, no flash, wedding ceremonies, street photography. The one thing that people would say, well, I want this field of view. I want to do some simplex portraiture. I want to do some stuff in low light ambient photography. People that we're going to full frame for, this one will not cover except with ultimate image output. And I've posted a lot of images, full TIFF files and JPEGs, and there's no denying by anybody, whether you like Fujifilm or not, that ultimate image output is the alpha and the omega of what this camera does produce. Is that fanboy talk? No, it's objectively valid and 100% undeniable. Everybody's seen the untouched, straight out of camera images from this that I've posted. It's undeniable. It's like, you know, shut up, that's it. That's it. You know, you just look, that's it. I've never seen anything. So many people comment like, oh my God, I've never seen, that's amazing. That's not hyperbolic. That's, you know, that's as truthful as it gets. Like I said, forgetting about the 102 megapixels of this BSI sensor, if this were the current sensor with these specifications, with this IBIS mech, with this fast autofocus, it would still be a game-changer, revolutionary camera in the medium format world. Period. And that's a very meaningful statement. If it were the same sensor in the 50S and 50R with the fast autofocus, with the low light handheld parameters, on and on, this would be still a revolutionary camera. It would open up a lot of eyes because there's nothing to sneeze at about 51 megapixels on either the GFX 50S or 50R. 90% of the things, like I said, that everybody is going to and has gone to for FX professional use, wedding ceremonies, ambient low light, pro work, event photography, street, the GFX100 does cover now that medium format never has before. This is, of course, on top of what it is already king over everything else for corporate photography, product photography, commercial, high-end fashion, landscapes, interiors. The most important statement of everything I've said is right now, and that I want to say, and I thought about this before making it, is that the GFX is, in a short summation, in a nutshell, a massive expansion of the bandwidth for the parameters of the use for medium format that has ever since been relegated to. I mean, medium format had this parameter. I mean, it's for ultimate image output. It was for it sat in a little box for corporate, product, commercial, high-end fashion, landscapes, and interiors. The bandwidth, or the size of that box, if you will, when I say bandwidth, you can say the size of the box or what you could use it for, has been vastly expanded. Places where medium format was, unless you wanted to torture yourself, you know, or do hit and miss photography, like, oh, you know, I tried to do it with medium format, I got one shot in 10. You know, you could do it, but not really, nor with any success before. Now you can do with success and ease. And this is no bigger than an FX, no big, you know, basically if I close my eyes, it feels like a Nikon D4. Not literally exactly, but I mean size-wise, weight-wise, that's not big. It's 102 megapixels of IBIS BSI sensor. I mean, so that is what this camera is. In short, it's a massive expansion of the bandwidth of the box, of the parameters of use for medium format that this camera embodies. I give this camera a 10 out of 10 across the board. I mean that emphatically. This is the camera that I'm most excited about owning. I really do mean that. No fanboy talk. I've said it twice or 3 times already. So you're going to buy this camera? Oh, absolutely I am. I've actually been selling. I sold a Nikon D4. There's a few really expensive lenses that I have that I'm going to sell to purchase this camera. You know, so stop accusing me of having a bunch of money. Right now I think there's got $400 sitting in my bank account. So, oh, you're buying that expensive camera? Expensive compared to what? This camera is actually extremely cheap if you're going to use it for work at all. I mean, it'll pay for itself overnight. What would I change on this camera? I can only think of one thing, and that could be a firmware update. You actually have 3 main screens that you could hit here when the camera is on. You have a histogram screen, you have the digital dials, which I don't use, and you have the main screen. I would actually add a 4th option, which could be easily added in a firmware update, which would be a hybrid of a couple different things. I don't want to get into that. But actually, that's the only thing that I could think that I would want to change on this camera. Absolutely across the board, in every way that I would judge this camera, I do give it a 10 out of 10. Oh, fanboy talk. There's got to be something you don't like about this camera. No, actually, of all the things that I'd heard about this camera and was expecting out of this camera before getting it, I mean this seriously. It far exceeds my expectations of what I was expecting out of this camera, especially for a handheld, low light, slow shutter speed, and for autofocus speed, blew my mind. The output actually also was, I didn't expect that, but maybe I should have anticipated. Very punchy and contrasting, very saturated in a good way. Extremely There's no word for it. If I actually use the word that I want to say, it sounds too fanboyish or too emphatic or over-exuberant or too bubbly. And I've been slamming this camera hard day and night for days and days, every single day, and extremely happy with it, extremely. The only sad thing I feel is having to return this camera in a couple days. That's the only sad thing I feel like, oh my God, I don't want to return this camera, I really don't. But it's not mine. But I'll have one just like it soon enough. So I hope you like this review. I take this video review very seriously. I've been a long time, lifelong. I started off with medium format. There's a twin lens Yashica 124 Mat G. I own several of those. I owned a couple Rollies. I always loved medium format. My working cameras, photography school, like 6-7 Pentaxes. Fujifilm, people say, well, $10,000 is expensive. Compared to what? No, it's actually not. Fujifilm is going to sell a lot of these cameras. A lot. People think, well, that's inexpensive. It's not, actually. It's not. For medium format, it's not expensive. And this camera blows every other medium format camera away. No other camera has this enormous bandwidth that this camera does. Not even 150 megapixel phase 1. Because those cameras are slower than a constipated turtle. They're insanely expensive, and those are tripod cameras, essentially. I hate to say that, but I mean, that's undeniable. You know, this is it. This is it. And that's not fanboy talk, because everything I say about this camera, I went over and over again. Very, very emphatic when I say this, because if I make an incorrect or an overbold statement about this, people will, hold my feet to the fire over it. And I will have nothing that I will second guess after making this video review and posting it. Not a single thing. Because I went over this, what I was going to say, and I mean it. So thank you so much for watching, and thanks for Fujifilm for letting me borrow this camera. People say, well, you're borrowing it, you're reviewing a camera you don't own. Well, I don't own it because I can't buy it yet. It's not for sale for like another 9 days. So when I can buy it, I will buy it. So if you like this video, you can always click the link below. Any small donation towards the Fujifilm account would be greatly welcome. And thank you so much for watching. Okay? Wait for it. Wait for it. Fujifilm.